What's up, plant lovers? We're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to talk about the beautiful, the wonderful, the majestic Monstera adansonii. Monstera, in this variety in particular, will add any touch of interest into any corner or room that it's put in. So let's go and get into how to take care of this plant to make sure that it not only survives, but it thrives. There are a couple of key elements that are needed in order to make sure that your plant survives and thrives. The first component is lighting. Lighting is critical when it comes to any houseplant, but it is especially important when it comes to a Monstera. You will read things online that say that Monstera can survive low light situations. This is true. However, if you want your plant to not only survive, but thrive, you need to make sure that you give it bright indirect light. Medium light is fine too, but if you want the leaves to become fenestrated and if you want your leaves to eventually become bigger, it's best to give it that bright indirect light. This particular Monstera is placed by a windowsill. Alternatively, you could place it into a room where, even though it isn't next to a windowsill, if the room is filled with a lot of light, that will also work. All right, now let's talk about watering. Depending on if you are growing your Monstera on a moss pole or if you're just keeping it in a pot, your watering technique might vary here. For this Monstera, since I have it on a moss pole, I top water. So what that means is I essentially take a bottle of water, I flip it on top of the moss pole, and I let the water feed the moss pole until water drips out of the bottom. Once water drips out of the bottom, I know that not only the moss pole is fully saturated, but also the soil is fully saturated as well. The saucer typically will be full of water. If that happens, no problem. You take the saucer, dump it out, put your Monstera back on, fine. The second way to do it would be just to water the soil. When you water the soil, only benefit the roots that are in the soil, and your Monstera might not necessarily attach to the moss pole, so it would still need to rely on these bands that I have. So the reason why I have these bands still in this Monstera is because it's still pretty small. But for my other Monsteras, no bands, the binding just continues to grow and the plants are absolutely beautiful. So again, depending on whether or not you are having your plant on a moss pole or if you are putting your plant directly into the soil, so no moss pole and it's trailing, you may need to top water or you might need to just water the soil. Alternatively, you can also bottom water. So bottom water basically is where you are putting your pot into a tub of water and you let the soil soak up from the bottom and fully saturate the soil. That tends to minimize the potential of you getting root rot. But if you have a pot like a terracotta pot, the chances of you getting root rot are very, very slim because your terracotta pots are very breathable. They will wick moisture more readily and more easily. You have oxygen exchange occurring as well, which is also beneficial to the roots. And they are by far one of my favorite pots to use when it comes to planting tropical plants. So that's how I handle your watering when it comes to Monstera. Depending on if you use a moss pole or if your plant is in the soil, choose which one works best for you. If you like videos like this and want to see more videos about tropical houseplants, tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. On the topic of moss and potting soil, let's talk about the soil composition that your Monstera likes. Regardless of if you're deciding to grow it up a moss pole or if you are just simply going to allow it to trail, initially your Monstera is going to need to be in some kind of medium for this initial root establishment. Make sure that your soil doesn't hold too much moisture. So if I were to water this particular plant, water's just going to flow through in about 30 seconds. If your soil holds too much moisture, that 30 seconds can end up being anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. That is how you know your soil holds too much moisture. My recommendation would be to do a 50-50 mix of perlite as well as potting soil. That way you get the proper amount of aeration, proper amount of water retention, and also reduce the likelihood that you're going to have root rot even though you might be using a terracotta pot. Now let's talk about fertilization. Fertilization is key to not only keeping your plants looking green, but also to make sure that your plants remain vibrant and thrive. So The age-old question is, how much fertilizer should you use? You'll have people that say make sure that you use diluted half amount of fertilizer, but I don't do that. I recommend you going full dosage. You will most likely not burn your leaves as long as you make sure that you're not going above the full dosage. When it comes to some of my tropical trees that I have outside, for instance, I'll do a dose and a half. But for these house plants that I like to keep inside, so like for my monsteras and my philodendrons, I just do a regular full dose. So that for me is about 1 tablespoon per gallon of water. I fertilize every single time that I water during the growing season, and I back off of that watering and I back off of that fertilizing during the dormant season to reduce the chance of root rot. So I would recommend that you do that if you want to keep your Monstera alive and allow it to thrive. Let's talk about pest control. Luckily, this particular Monstera doesn't have any signs of pest. One of the signs of pest is if your plant is becoming distressed. You'll know that your plant is under distress if you notice signs of yellowing leaves, for instance, browning of your leaves, spotting on your leaves, webbing that's all throughout your leaves. If this is happening to you, then here is what I would recommend that you do in order to resolve those issues. The first thing that I would recommend that you do is try the soap and water method. So I would recommend that you mix up a solution that's a couple of tablespoons of dish soap, so about 4 tablespoons of dish soap to 1 gallon of water. Make that soapy solution and spray it on your leaves. The soapy solution should help in minimizing the impact of pests that you might have. If that doesn't work, I would also recommend that you use solutions such as neem oil. Neem oil is great to minimize pests. However, one of the things that you need to do, or make sure that you do if you're using something like a neem oil, is after neem oil is applied to your leaves, make sure that you move your plant away from that bright place where it's receiving all that sunlight. Neem oil and sun don't typically mix well together. So if you spray your leaves, for instance, and you keep your plant in the same spot, you might notice that your leaves will begin to yellow and brown. So I would also use that method as well. Finally, a happy plant is less likely to become distressed. So as long as you are watering and fertilizing appropriately and your plant is putting on new growth, chances are you won't run into issues where pests take over your plant. Pests typically attack plants that are already in distress. Once those pests get a hold of your plant, it will ultimately start a cycle where it becomes even more and more distressed, and before you know it, your plant is on its last leg and you have to perform some kind of emergency miracle on it. If you take care of your plant to the point where you're fertilizing regularly, not overwatering, and keeping an eye on it, you don't have to worry about that kind of stress happening to your plant. Let's get into some features of the Monstera. The Monstera is a binding plant. So that means what you'll notice is that your Monstera will grow on a single vine and each leaf will come from a preceding leaf stem. So as you can see here, I will have another leaf form from the prior leaf stem. If you do cut off the top of your Monstera, you will get growth that will come from the nodes along the stem. But if you want it to just keep a main vertical stem, no cutting is necessary and it will just continue to grow taller and taller and taller. Next, let's talk about the leaves. The leaves are probably one of my favorite features of the Monstera. The fenestrations are what give the Monstera its really unique character. This particular Monstera has holes or fenestrations that are quite large relative to the leaf, but this helps to make sure that if the plant is in a very, very bright environment, so next to a windowsill, for instance, the fenestrations allow for light to penetrate through them so that the leaves underneath can also get ample amount of sunlight. So there you have it. That's how I take care of my Monstera adansonii. If you have any other tips or tricks about how to take care of Monstera or any other tropical houseplants, be sure to leave them down in the comments. I would love to hear them so I can learn from you as well. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.